Hi, welcome to the third Google Hangout here at the National Museum of Art at Duke University. We are here in the Miro exhibition, The Experience of Seeing, and I am Marshall Price, the Nancy Hanks Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art and the curator responsible for installing the exhibition. And this Google Hangout is something like a cross between Sister Wendy and the Khan Academy, where we are going to be talking a little bit about the exhibition. Today we're going to be focusing in depth on several works in the show, just to give you an idea. And if you've been following along in the previous Hangouts, we've talked a lot about the history of the artist, going all the way back to his early days in Barcelona. We've talked about his time in Paris in the 1920s with the Surrealists. And we've talked about his time moving back to Spain after World War II in 1940. And that's basically where we're going to begin today. So as we know, Miró moves back to Spain in 1940, right at the beginning of World War II. And in many ways, it was a response to Franco and the dictatorial regime that had taken over, and a sort of gesture of protest. So Miró moves back to Spain in 1940 and really shares his time between Barcelona, the island of Mallorca, and his family's farm in Montreuil, south of Barcelona. By the mid-1950s, however, things change quite a bit for the artist, and he moves full-time to the island of Mallorca. And this is really where he begins a new period of creativity in his life, and where the seed for the body of work, or the bodies of work that are included in this exhibition, come from. So he moves to Mallorca in 1956 for the first time and rediscovers decades of his previous work that become great inspirations for the future. And he builds on that to create many of the works that we'll see, that we see in the exhibition, and several of which we'll talk about specifically today. 1956 was also an important year for him for several reasons. Not only does he move to Mallorca, but he also receives an important commission for a mural at the UNESCO building in Paris. And this is the mural here. It's a ceramic mural. And in the middle of working on the mural, Miró became inspired to seek out the prehistoric painted cave at Altamira in Spain. It's in northern Spain. It's not too far from Barcelona. In any case, Miró had this great sort of desire to seek out this prehistoric cave, which he had never visited. He had known about previously, but he had never visited in person. And so when he went to visit the cave, these are the types of images that he saw. And the cave is probably one of, if not the best examples of prehistoric art that we know of. He had become interested in prehistoric art beginning in the 1920s. It was really floating around the ether at that time. The Surrealists were very much interested in it. And it was because they felt that prehistoric humans had access to the unconscious areas of the mind that had been shut off by modern life. And so in accessing those areas, the artist would, in theory at least, be able to unlock certain parts of the creative spirit that were otherwise inaccessible. And one of the things that Miró was so interested in seeing these images was how the prehistoric artist used the shapes of the cave in order to create these works. And it's what we call plasticity, or using form, line, color, and shape in order to create these living works. This particular example is really quite relevant for the painting that we're going to be talking about today, this bison that's painted on the cave. And you might not be able to tell from the image here, but what the artist did was actually use the convex surface of the rock formation in order to create the body of the bison itself. And when we look at this bison, actually, in direct comparison to the earliest work in the exhibition, we can see just how similar not only the forms are, but also this interest in plasticity, as I said, the attention to line, form, color, and shape. The title of this painting here is Person Before Landscape. And as we can see, it's quite an abstract painting. But I want to remind everybody watching that Miro never thought of himself as an abstract artist. He always vehemently defended that his work was rooted in the real world. And when we look closely, even at a work like this, even at a work that's as abstract as this one, we can see elements of the representational world. We just have to look really closely. So let's start with the background. The background is green. It's very much like a landscape. There's a horizontal line across the middle of the painting. Perhaps this signifies a horizon line that we see in many conventional landscapes. There's a figure. If we look closely at the black outlines, we can see this voluminous shape in the lower portion of the painting, perhaps a body, a large dot in the middle of the painting, perhaps an eye, and these two trident-like forms reaching up into the sky, most likely the arms and hands of the figure. And if we look closely in the upper right corner, we see this small red dot surrounded by a yellow ring. It could be the sun, it could be the moon, it could be any kind of combination of any celestial bodies, really, at all. And so this work from 1963 is the earliest work in the exhibition. And keep in mind, it's only 7 years after Miró visited the caves at Altamira that really became a major inspiration for him in almost all of his work from then on. We can see this inspiration continued even in the sculpture. And again, as I had mentioned before in some of the hangouts, there's a strong connection in the exhibition between painting and sculpture. Miró was known primarily as a painter and a printmaker, but he was also, and especially at this period in his life, a prolific sculptor. And we really can see that from all of the work in the exhibition. But I want to focus on this work here in particular. It is simply titled bas relief or low relief, and it comes from a series of relief sculptures that Miro created in 1969. Miro was really wonderful at gathering objects that he found on his walks on the beach, in the road, in the trash even, and he would bring them back to his studio and use them to create the sculptures in the exhibition. And what we can see in this relief here is that what he's done is used a piece of corrugated cardboard, this very ephemeral object, as the surface on which he drew essentially with three-dimensional lines. And again, when he went to Altamira, he saw carvings, not only the paintings, but also carvings in the side of the cave, very similar to this type of work here. Again, it's an extremely abstract work. We don't exactly know immediately what it is represented in the piece. The title does not give us any kind of clue whatsoever, but it's very much related to many of the anthropomorphic figures that he saw in the cave at Altamira, and most likely an animal figure of some sort, perhaps a fish, who knows. He also included, that may be difficult to see in the image here, a small, probably a plastic bottle of some sort. So he's incorporating not only the cardboard and bottle and other found objects into his work, but he's adding to that those high ridges in order to create a sort of drawing effect. Now, I just want to talk about one more thing before we conclude today, and that is really Miró's sense of signature and putting his own being into the works. And again, I think when we want to talk about this, or when we talk about this, we really have to go back in time, really many tens of thousands of years, to understand how he thought about the artist's position vis-a-vis the work of art. One of the best known signatures in prehistoric art is the stencil of the human hand. We can see that here. It was the human hand stencil are some of the oldest human markings in prehistoric art, and are even to our contemporary eye unmistakable as a signature of human presence. Miró knew about this. He may not have seen the human hand stencils in person, but because of his interest in prehistoric art, he certainly would have known about it. And there are several works in our exhibition that really speak to this same interest in sort of imparting his own human signature into the work. One work, for example, is called Woman Figure Bird from 1973 to 77. It's a drawing. And if you look closely in the left-hand side of the work, you can see very clearly a distinct human handprint. So Miró actually signed the work in pencil, signed his name on the work on the right-hand side of the piece, but on the left-hand side, he included this stamp of his hand, very much like the prehistoric hand stencils that we just saw. And for Miró, you know, the signature, the pencil, the written signature was one thing, but for him, placing this hand into the work itself, this unmistakable sign of human presence, was for him a way of signing it in a much more universal way. It was a symbol that everyone, no matter what culture, would recognize almost immediately. And this actually wasn't limited to handprints for Miró. I mean, he used the handprint in a lot of work, not only the work that I just showed you, but many of his works, especially during this period in his life. But it wasn't limited. His interest in this sort of human signature wasn't interested only to the hand, and he used the footprint as well, not only in his paintings, but also in his sculpture. And this work in the exhibition, Figure from 1968, is a really wonderful example of that. So that's just to show you a couple examples of how Miró wanted to really impart his humanness into the work by using his handprint and using his footprint. Do we have any questions?
We do have a question. Carol has a question. She wanted to know about the piece. It was made out of cardboard. She wanted to know if the piece was cast after it's originally made.
Yeah, that's a really... So we had a question about the piece that was made from cardboard and then cast. So Miró's process in terms of making sculptures, he would gather the objects together, whether it be cardboard or a wooden board or a stick or stone. He would gather it together, create the work in 3 dimensions out of those objects, and then they would be cast in bronze, and those original objects would be lost. Usually the sculptures were cast in editions of 7 or 9, so very small editions. So this is one of probably 7 identical works. Are there any other questions? Do we have any other questions? No? Well, thank you all very much for joining me here at the National Museum of Art at Duke University in Miró, the Experience of Seeing. We hope to see you here. The exhibition will be on view until January 22nd. So don't miss it, and go back. If you haven't seen the earlier Google Hangouts, you can watch them online on the Nasher's YouTube channel. So thank you again for joining me.